In our studio in Tel Aviv, my very special guest, conservative member of British Parliament, former government chief whip, a Tory who has even been touted as a possible successor to Prime Minister Theresa May, Right Honourable Mark Harper. Sir, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Joining me also in the discussion today are reporter for the Times of Israel, Raoul Wootlif, and from Prague, international affairs commentator, Tom Gross. Thank you guys. Good to see you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Sir, let's start with, I want to tell us, first of all, what brings you to Israel? Why are you here?
So we're on a trip with 6 of my conservative parliamentary colleagues, organised by Conservative Friends of Israel. Mm-hmm. But this trip is, rather than one focused on the politics of the region, this is focused sort of in the post-Brexit Britain, now that we've decided to leave the European Union. This is focused on trade and business. So we've been looking at some of the sectors of the Israeli economy. So we've been looking at cyber, pharmaceuticals, and some of the areas where there's the opportunity to grow trade both ways, both between Britain and Israel and Britain, and looking at opportunities there are for politicians to help grow that relationship between our two countries.
It's part of, Britain's effort after Brexit to get more trade agreements with more countries?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
So you've obviously heard both the Israeli Prime Minister and our Prime Minister have both expressed an interest in a free trade agreement post-leaving the European Union. So this is part of our effort as backbenchers to meet with Israeli companies and look at opportunities for us both to be even more successful.
Okay, well, let's talk about, the news of the day. This is what everybody's talking about. It's almost like a typical, almost stereotypical cliche day. You're getting a real taste of what this region looks like. Mortar and rocket fire on Israeli communities near Gaza. One mortar falling near a kindergarten, Israeli kindergarten. 5 Israelis injured so far from shrapnel. We've been through a fairly violent month of May, and it seems like June, which is just coming around the corner, might be even hotter. What or who do you attribute this new round of violence to? Who do you hold responsible, and what's your response to today's events?
Well, I think just commenting on today's events, I mean, both my view and also the view of the British government has been very clear, which is there is no excuse for firing rockets at civilians, particularly, as you just highlighted, where they could risk injuring or killing innocent children. There's just no excuse for it, and it's completely unacceptable. On the wider question, we actually debated the recent events on the Gaza border in Parliament, the British Parliament, twice, actually, and I spoke in both of those, and Alistair Burt, the British Minister for the Middle East, responded for the government, and I made it very clear that we ought to listen to wait for the facts, and obviously the second time we talked about it, it was clear that most of those that sadly lost their lives were Hamas or Islamic Jihad.
You're talking about the May 14th day when over 60 people were killed?
Yes, but we've also, the British government's been clear that there needs to be some sort of independent investigation into it, but a genuinely independent one, and we talked in our Parliament about the UN Human Rights Committee, which was not an independent investigation, which refused to even mention Hamas and Islamic Jihad's responsibility and attributed blame in the resolution setting up, and that's why the British government abstained and didn't support that resolution. So I think the
Why abstain? Why not just vote against?
Well, my understanding is, I think, that there was also, it was to try and maximise the support. There were many European countries that abstained, and I think the reason for not voting against was the British government was quite clear that it wanted some kind of independent investigation, but one that was genuinely independent and would look at both the role of the Israeli government, but also the responsibility that Hamas has, given that it controls Gaza and has a responsibility for these events.
Let's go to our panelists. Raoul, what do you think of the events today? And I mean, is there a feeling of deja vu that we've been here before?
Well, you said this is a stereotypical day, and actually, I mean, there is a sense of deja vu, but it's not a stereotypical day, at least in recent days, weeks, months, and even years.
Right.
This is certainly an escalation. We saw a barrage of mortar rockets this morning. And as you said, a rocket exploding outside a kindergarten, Israelis injured. These are events that will affect the actions of the politicians in the coming days, and have the potential, a great potential for a serious escalation.
Let's go to Tom Gross. Let's weigh in with Tom Gross. What do you think? Same question, basically. Deja vu feeling for you as well today?
Well, yes, but let me say about Britain's call for an independent investigation about the events in Gaza. First of all, Britain might want to hold an independent investigation about the civilians that died in American and British-led airstrikes in Mosul and Raqqa in the campaign against ISIS over the last year or so. You know, the Pentagon has admitted that American planes have killed 801 civilians as of last November, and a lot more since. Britain claims to have killed only one civilian that no one really thinks is credible. I'm not judging the rights and wrongs of the campaign against ISIS and how difficult it was to avoid so-called collateral damage, but before Britain calls for an independent investigation against Israel, they might want to call for an independent investigation about their own conduct.
You want to respond to that, sir?
Well, we've been very clear. We take a great deal of care when we're in the campaign that we've been waging against Daesh in Iraq and Syria. And actually, I don't agree with the comment that no one finds our claims of only having killed one civilian credible. We're very careful about what we did. And the fact that we actually publicly, proactively say where we've accidentally led to the death of civilians, I think demonstrates that we take this very seriously. We treat human life very carefully in our actions against Daesh, as do the Americans.
Okay. I want to go to our military correspondent just outside the Strip, the Gaza Strip, Daniel Tzemach. Daniel, thanks for joining us today. Daniel, can you give us a quick update about what's going on right now outside the border? How many rockets have been fired? How many people have been injured? Maybe on both sides, if you can tell us.
Well, Ami, as of now, we don't have full confirmation on how many projectiles have been launched from the Strip. The IDF earlier confirmed that around 25, or at least 25, I should say, projectiles were intercepted, both mortars as well as rockets. But since then, there have been reports that it's been as high as 100 projectiles launched. That's including mortars, mind you, not necessarily all rocket fire. The latest we had was around 4 p.m. Israel time. There was another barrage of sirens as well as rocket fire that actually stretched to an area for a little bit more north of the Gaza Strip. That's the Ofakim region. For a little bit of a further distance might suggest that those were actually rockets as opposed to mortars. Again, according to the Israeli military, 3 soldiers were wounded. 2 of them wounded very lightly, 1 wounded moderately as a result of these projectiles being launched. Also, on a naval front, the Israeli Navy has stopped a Palestinian boat that the Israeli military claims was trying to breach the Israeli naval blockade. They brought that ship back to the Israeli naval port of Ashdod, and those suspects, 17 Palestinians more or less, are going to be questioned. And there's also medical units on site in Ashdod to provide any medical attention if they need. But the IDF claims there were no extraordinary incidents from the stopping of that boat.
Okay, Daniel Tzemach from the Israel-Gaza border. Thank you very much. Sir, despite all this that we're seeing today, do you think Israel should negotiate with Hamas to reach a ceasefire agreement in Gaza and maybe avoid this humanitarian crisis that we're hearing about in the Strip?
No, I think we've been very clear. I mean, look, the British government's position about Hamas is very clear. I mean, it's a proscribed terrorist organisation, and we've also been very clear. The British government's been consistent that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself. Well, I think if I just take, for example, our experience in Northern Ireland, we were very clear that you only do that when certain preconditions are met, and you can't negotiate with people who don't accept your right to exist and people who are continuing to use violence. So if I look at the situation in Northern Ireland, we were able to reach a negotiated situation, but the IRA had to accept that you reached a settlement by consent, and they had to forswear using violence. If those preconditions were met, people can talk to each other, but you can't talk to people who don't accept your right to exist and are continuing to use violence against your civilians.
The Palestinians are now boycotting U.S. mediation here in the region. Why doesn't your government take a bigger role in this process instead of taking that back seat they usually take?
Well, I wouldn't agree we've taken a back seat. We're very clear about where we want to get to. So the British government and the British position is that it wants to support a 2-state solution. We do think the US has a very important role here. I know there's been controversy here since the Trump administration's decision to move the embassy.
I'm going to ask you soon when we come back. We have to go for a break, but I want to ask you soon about Britain's intentions of maybe moving or not moving the embassy. Sir, I was going to ask you, now that the U.S. has moved this embassy, don't you think now it's time for Britain to do the same?
No, we've got no plans to do so. We've been very clear that we didn't support the US move. We've got no plans to move our embassy, and we we support the moves to a two-state solution, and we think the US is going to play a key role in the move, and we'll support any efforts, and we're obviously waiting for the Trump administration to bring forward its proposals.
Let's go to Tom. Tom, do you think the British Embassy will anytime soon move the embassy, and do you think the British could play a larger role in this process?
Well, Michael Gove, who of course Mark will know well, actually suggested in an article in The Times shortly before he re-entered government that Britain move its embassy to Jerusalem as something useful towards the peace process, to make it clear that the future capital of Israel will be Jerusalem, or at least West Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. So I think actually that Britain and maybe other European countries, for example, the Czech Republic, where I am at present, is talking about moving its embassy to Jerusalem. And I don't think it's unhelpful to a two-state solution. In fact, I think it's helpful to establish some facts on the ground and make things clear, and then make the Palestinians negotiate so they too can have an embassy within Jerusalem boundaries in future.
Raoul?
Well, President Donald Trump has said that he's taken Jerusalem off the table. In fact, we've seen for many countries, particularly European countries, that Jerusalem has become much more of a contentious issue. Yes, some European countries, a handful, including the Czech Republic, have made moves that suggesting they may think about moving their embassy, but the vast majority of European countries have clearly stated they have no intention to do so, and the American move has pushed that issue further away. We saw a celebratory event by the Israel Foreign Ministry the day before the US moved its embassy. No European countries except for four Eastern European countries were present, and that wasn't even for the embassy move, that was just for an Israeli Foreign Ministry celebration. Mm-hmm. While some people would be hopeful that the US move could influence other countries, it seems like it's influenced them to currently hold their ground.
Okay, I see that Tom wants to weigh in again quickly.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that Donald Trump has had his entire life working in real estate, as has Kushner and Greenblatt and some of the other advisors to Trump. And in some respects, the Israeli-Palestinian dispute and conflict is a real estate conflict. And therefore, if you look at Trump's approach also to North Korea and other issues, I wouldn't say that moving the embassy was unhelpful. And, you know, we have to look at this in real estate terms. And whether it will work or not, I think Trump and his team do have a strategy here. And it's a different kind of strategy than has been tried in the past.
You think you have any hope for this Trump strategy?
Well, there is some evidence from what's happened with North Korea that his approach of kind of doing some things that catch people unawares actually can, you know, shake up the kaleidoscope,
so you'll give him credit for that, will you?
and can lead to some things. Whether his approach will be successful in the Middle East, given all the complexities, I mean, only time will tell.
It's a good segue to my next question, because there's a segment about the Iran nuclear deal. Trump left the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, and of course Britain and Europe did not want that to happen. That was kind of a failure of British and European diplomacy, wasn't it?
What, the deal, or the fact the US...
The fact that you didn't manage to convince Donald Trump to stay.
Clearly, we've been very clear, the European members of that deal, that we thought that was a good deal to do what its limited aims were, which was to deal with the nuclear program. It wasn't... a lot of the things the US was criticising it for, you know, is Iran's unacceptable behaviour in the region, its support for Hezbollah, its interference in Syria, its attack on Israel through that means. The deal was nothing to do with any of those things. It was to do with the nuclear programme, and the European government's view is that it was successful in dealing with that. But clearly, Iran and its conduct in the region raises a whole load of wider questions, which we need to work with our partners, including the United States, to make sure Iran's behaviour becomes more acceptable.
Raoul, was it a good deal, or is the world actually a better place now that Donald Trump left that deal?
Well, we're yet to see. We had a speech last week by the newly appointed US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who put forward a shopping list of things that he would like to be included in the deal, but no strategy so far, at least none that he made public. I think many European countries are also waiting to hear a strategy. Next week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is travelling to Europe to meet with Macron, Merkel, and Prime Minister May, and he'll discuss with them. But at the moment, we have no strategy from the Trump administration how to create another deal, how to bring Iran back to the table, other than sanctions, which in the first place were not did not do enough to prevent the Iranian nuclear program.
Tom.
Two things. I think that Trump wins both ways. The Europeans will continue the deal, and therefore Iran may still continue to comply. And at the same time, Trump will exert pressure, badly needed pressure, on Iran because, quite frankly, the deal wasn't good enough. I'd also add, vis-a-vis North Korea, that Trump wants to show the North Koreans that he's not going to accept a bad deal that will just allow them to sort of put their weapons to one side for a few years and then get them out again. I think I don't think anyone thinks this in the Middle East thinks, apart from the Iranian regime, thinks the deal was a good deal. In fact, most Arab countries stand by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in welcoming Trump's suspension of the deal.
Okay, well, after Brexit, the United Kingdom needs to sign a new trade deal with the U.S., but Trump's decision to leave that Iran deal seems to have somewhat harmed your relations with the U.S. because UK banks and businesses trading with Iran, they may risk U.S. penalties, like restricted access to American capital and markets. Would you call for British businesses to stop dealing with Iran in order to help relations or save relations with the United States?
Well, first of all, our relationship with the United States is incredibly important. It's our single most important bilateral relationship, and we work very closely with them across defence, security, as well as our trading relationship. So my understanding is the British government's working closely with the Trump administration on what comes out of the two different viewpoints about the Iranian deal, and we'll work that through. But I'm very confident that post-Brexit, as well as being able to sign a free trade agreement with Israel, the United Kingdom will be able to sign a free trade agreement with the United States, and Donald Trump's made that very clear.
Do you think they can work that through? Because they're kind of between a rock and a hard place on this issue. Brexit put them in a hard place because of the Iran deal.
You mentioned before, potential failure of British diplomacy. I think that it's very difficult to judge how to relate to the United States at the moment. I mean, Donald Trump's own administration has very little idea what he's about to say in the next 5 minutes. And many of these international moves that we're seeing in North Korea, in Israel, there's been some sort of plan that he's gone against, and then they've scrambled to form another plan around it. And I think it's very difficult for the UK to predict how Donald Trump is going to behave, how the rest of the administration is going to behave around that. And so I agree, they're in a very difficult position.
But before we go for our break, speaking of Brexit, are you happy with where negotiations are currently at the moment?
Yeah, look, I've always been very clear that this is a negotiation, and unlike most negotiations, it's one that's being conducted in public. So it's going to be bumpy. We're going to get the European countries are going to be being very tough. We're being very tough back. Actually, at every stage, when everyone said we weren't going to make progress, we've made progress, and the Prime Minister has delivered at each stage. So I'm very confident we'll get to a good outcome. Is it going to be bumpy? Yes, it is. And you just kind of have to get through that to get to the end, to get a good deal and get a good relationship with our European partners going forward.
Okay. Brexit also has the possibility of, it's put the possibility of Irish unification on the table. There seems to be a growing number of Remainers in Northern Ireland and talk of a referendum to unify these two regions. Is that a problem in your eyes?
Well, if I go back, I don't really accept the premise of your question. I don't think there's any evidence that it's more likely. I mean, the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland is an issue for the Brexit negotiations, but the British government's been very clear. We want to make sure there's no hard border, there's no customs infrastructure. So one of the things we're looking at doing in the negotiations is how do we make sure that happens. But actually, the Irish government doesn't want a hard border. We don't want a hard border, and actually the EU doesn't, and actually supports the Good Friday Agreement, which delivered the settlement that led to peace. So I think everyone wants to achieve that. We've just got to work through the tough details.
Well, you don't have a lot
there.
of time. Tom, could this issue of a hard border between the Irelands actually, maybe even bring down the May government? Because she needs to find a solution very quickly before this June European Council to talk about this customs border that this is bringing up. What do you think, Tom?
I don't think it will bring down the government, but certainly remember she's got the Irish party backing up the government. Otherwise, it's a very slim majority of one or so. But certainly Brexit. Look, I've had problems with Brexit from the beginning, not because I'm an admirer of the European Union. The EU is very problematic, but precisely because of this. It's extremely difficult to divorce from 27 other countries. And, you know, there's no smooth way of doing this without various problems. If it's not the Irish border, it will be another problem.
Okay. Let's talk about anti-Semitism a bit. The Conservatives have been in power since 2010. During those years under your rule, the United Kingdom has witnessed a dramatic spike in anti-Semitic incidents. We're going to put up these graphics. You can see this is actually from 2012 to 2017. Basically more than doubled, sir. It seems that anti-Semites feel emboldened under Tory rule, don't they?
Well, no, I don't agree with that. We've been very...
The numbers show that.
We've been very good. Part of that is about the improvements in reporting, because we've been very clear. We've worked with the Community Security Trust, which I can see is the source of that data.
So there is no spike in anti-Semitism?
Well, so there has been an increase, but some of it is about better reporting, because we've worked closely with the Community Security Trust to provide security. Okay. There has been in the political arena, and your viewers will have seen this, there's been a real problem...
How do you explain that spike?
Well, there's been a real problem in politics. The Labour Party has accepted that it has a problem, its own leadership, and many Labour MPs have...
So you're blaming anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom because of the Labour Party?
No, what I said was the Labour Party has accepted it has a problem, and many Labour MPs have had unacceptable abuse from anti-Semites
we'll talk
on
about
social media.
You've been ruling. Well, how do you explain the spike?
And we've been very clear that anti-Semitism is unacceptable. We've adopted the international definition of it, and in fact I was at an event that the Prime Minister spoke at about setting out the steps that we were going to take to make sure that police forces and communities have the tools necessary to deal with anti-Semitism, and that it was completely and utterly unacceptable in the United Kingdom.
Raoul, is there a connection between Tory rule and the spike in anti-Semitism, as the numbers at least show, apparently?
I don't think that we can say there's a clear connection. There's been a rise in anti-Semitism across the continent, although I think there is a clear distinction to be made between the experience of many Jews, or of the Jewish community in the UK and other countries in Europe. But I don't think it's necessarily fair to blame the
Tories. Okay, let's hear what Tom says.
Yes, in fact, I'd even go further, even though I'm not a Conservative like Mark, in saying your question was very unfair. The Conservative Party is probably the least anti-Semitic party in Britain, and both the May government and the Cameron government before that have not in any way been anti-Semitic. However, the Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, has very much been anti-Semitic, and even today, after the former Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, resigned rather than was expelled, Corbyn said it was sad that Livingstone had to resign. I don't think Corbyn would say it's sad if some person was racist against black people or Muslims. He wouldn't have had to resign. And also, I think Corbyn elevated to the House of Lords a woman who defended lots of the anti-Semitic Labour things. That was only a week or two ago. So in the case of Britain, it is very much fed by the hard left, not just politicians, also the media, also academics and so on. And the hard left is presently in control of the British Labour Party.
Has Corbyn been doing enough to tackle the problem in his party?
Well, I don't think he has, and that's not just my view. I mean, if you listen to Labour MPs, they don't think that they've moved fast enough, and indeed he himself has admitted that they haven't moved fast enough, and we'll judge what they do by the action that they take. But they do have a real problem, and we had a debate in Parliament. Lots of Labour MPs, you know, themselves set out the unacceptable abuse that they'd had and said that their party hadn't dealt with it quickly enough. So I hope they do, because it is unacceptable. Prime Minister's made that clear, as Tom acknowledged, and I hope the Labour Party deal with it as effectively as we have.
Tom, really, 20 seconds, quickly.
Yeah. There was a memorial event for Tessa Jowell, a senior Labour politician who died of cancer early this month. And at that event, it's reported today, her own Labour Party members started booing in the minute's silence and started going on about Gaza, which is a kind of code for anti-Semitism, which had nothing to do with Tessa Jowell. So even at events for their own former ministers, the Labour activists are quite frankly being anti-Semitic in a way.
Well, just before we go, Sir, Prince William will be coming to Israel, the first royal visit to the country very soon. Until now, it was even known as the royal snub of Israel. Why did it take so long?
Well, I don't know, but I think it's fantastic that the Duke of Cambridge is coming, and I hope that he sees on his visit some of the really fantastic things that we've seen on our visit. If I can just say very briefly, yesterday we were at SodaStream, and one thing I think would be fantastic if the Duke of Cambridge could see would be what I saw, which was a Palestinian shift manager, and it would be fantastic if that Palestinian shift manager could take the Duke of Cambridge around that site to meet the very diverse diverse workforce at that company, which I think says a lot of very positive things about the modern state of Israel.
We'll have to end on that positive note. That's all the time we have. I want to thank our panelists, Tom Gross and Raoul Wootlif. Thank you very much, guys. And a special thank you to today's guest on the Spin Room, Mark Harper. Have a great trip here in Israel, and a safe journey back home to Britain.